to attend.
All right, great. Thank you very much. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please, if you would stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God.
Our secretary is not here tonight. Mr. Smith, would you do the roll call, please?
Kathy Postlewaite.
Present.
Josh Fedor.
Present.
Ms. Henshaw. Steve Mundy. Present. Jim Hurst.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. I'm assuming that everyone has had a chance to look over the minutes from the November meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Hurst. Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The minutes are approved as presented. The first item on our agenda is continued.
It's not going to be continued. The petitioner has requested to withdraw his request. And since no evidence has been presented, you can just take a motion and approve that withdrawal request.
Do we have a motion to withdraw petition number 2024-41-DSV?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Hurst. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Mundy. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The petition has been withdrawn. New business. We have docket number 2024-48-DSV, and that is the Zionsville Parks and Recreation Board for a development standard. We'll start, with your permission, with the staff report, and then after the staff report, you'll have the chance to address the board. Thank you very much. Mr. Smith?
Yes, ma'am. So this is a request by the Zionsville Park and Rec Board related to the Carpenter Nature Preserve, specifically addressing the number of parking spaces being provided. If you look at the way this is classified, it's in our zoning ordinance, we don't have a specific category that's relative to a nature preserve. So staff had to use the closest available category, which in this case was classified as an outdoor recreation facility. Other things that have been classified as outdoor recreation facility, outdoor concert venues, baseball fields, football stadiums, that type of thing, places that tend to draw large crowds. Using the formula, which I think it's 5 parking spaces per acre, that's applied to outdoor recreation facilities, you get to 1,082 or 83 parking spaces that the zoning ordinance requires for this nature preserve. Staff is aligned with the park board in thinking that we could reduce and only provide 113, which is what the request is. The unique nature of what they're trying to do, coupled with really the absence of a category classification in our zoning ordinance, is why staff is inclined to support this request. If you have specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but essentially, request is to reduce the number from 1,082 or 83 down to 113. I believe the 113 spaces, you can correct me if I'm wrong, are around the existing clubhouse and a pavilion that's out there. So yeah, if y'all have any questions, happy to answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Smith on the staff report?
How would we classify a park? If someone, let's say the park we're trying to put in, what they classify as a park, how would that work as far as parking requirements?
To be honest with you, I don't really know, but I can look real quick if you give me a second. That's just another example. Park specifically is not a specific classification. So in instances where it's not directly mentioned, staff would have to find a classification that best aligns with park, right? So I can't give you a direct answer right now because I haven't looked through all these classifications, but it's not one that's clearly and apparent on our chart. So this is a great example of some of the gaps in our zoning ordinance with some of the uses that we commonly see, right?
It might be interesting as we get the report from the petitioner to understand what they calculate when they, because there are some new park facilities that have been put in, what they calculate for required parking.
Yeah.
If they use as a rule of thumb, maybe they can help us with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any further questions for Mr. Petitioners here, the Parks and Parks Board, would you give your name and address for the record, please?
Absolutely. Jared Logston, Superintendent of Parks and Recreation here at Zionsville, 1100 West Oak Street. So yeah, as mentioned in the packet, this is a 215-acre nature preserve in Union Township, and we see this, and we're very excited to enter into this phase of our park system, providing to date our largest park, with a special focus on preserving much of the natural character of that park space. So truly, many acres of this parkland is going to remain in a natural state and just be enhanced, removing invasives and replacing native species so that the species that are the wildlife that are displaced throughout our community as it continues to grow can use this future nature preserve as a safe haven. So, it is our attempt to still supply the basic infrastructure needed to what we think will be the capacities we would be programming this park. But truly, at this phase, we will be having a restroom pavilion where small, classes might meet or programming, and then the rest of it is just trails, both rustic and accessible, as well as a 25-person amphitheater. So again, very small events that might be programmed out there. This request is utilizing 88 spaces that already exist from the former clubhouse, which will just be fenced off, but that area will be accessible for parking, as well as 25 new spaces that will immediately adjoin that pavilion that we're building. So our goal here is to save paradise and not put in too many parking lots.
I get the reference. I'm probably the only person in the room that does, but you do.
Ernie Mitchell.
You're not.
I'm with you.
Are there any questions for the petitioner about this petition? For a Plan B, in case you would have some kind of an event scheduled there that would require more than the number of places that you're stipulating?
With 215 acres, there's certainly adequate room for, parking in some of those natural areas. But again, specific to this nature preserve, we want to keep our impact very low. So although we would have enough trails for a 5K or a 10K, that's not really the nature of what we would want to program out here. So we intend to be pretty restrictive on what goes on out here, and that's actually incorporated in a lot of the language of the deed.
Thank you.
What's the expected capacity, people-wise, for the amphitheater?
25 is roughly the seating for that. So again, it's not trying to be a concert venue by any means. It's simply an outdoor auditorium for speakers and programming and things like that.
So all the parking is going to be 80 spots of the parking are going to be down by the old clubhouse. Is the clubhouse getting renovated to where that's going to be a use, or is this just 80 annex parking spots that are down in the corner that you have to walk from?
And again, being 215 acres, there will be trails at that end as well that can be accessed, and that is actually where the amphitheater is by the old clubhouse. But for the immediate future, there are no plans for restoring or replacing that clubhouse. We're actually going to place a large fence around it and then show renderings of what could be there in the future with the nature center. And so the overall master plan of this site would be to include a regional nature center, at which point I certainly agree we would need to expand the parking to accommodate that facility. There's also grand plans for some mixed use closer to the entrance of 900, which would also have its own associated parking. And within the master plan, there's also plans to add parking along the entrance drives.
Am I wrong that there's also a contemplated food service of some type?
That would be
Future?
that mixed use right
Yep.
towards the entrance, yep.
I guess I'm mixed on if this is enough parking. This is, clearly a tremendously large parcel, and while I don't think the intent is to have large events there, this isn't like our other parks in town. This is not connected with any trails, so people aren't going to be taking their bikes and walking the trails and everything to it. So I guess I'm concerned that it's not enough parking up by the event facility, nor with the majority of the parking being down in the corner. Well, I respect it wants to be off to the side, but that is, if it's the old clubhouse parking, it's kind of hidden and off on the corner. I just, like I said, I don't know if it's enough parking for a facility of this size. I got a feeling you're going to see a lot of people parking in the grass along your trails going into facilities, but
I think that's a completely valid point, and I certainly think when the park is shiny and new, in its early infancy, we will have a lot more traffic, but, as we monitor our parks that do exist today, we really don't have overcrowding, except at Starkey Park, which, also being of a sizable landmass doesn't have the same ratio of parking spaces either. So that's just more of growing pains of an older park in a more modern system. But again, the spirit of this park is to be just as rustic and open to exploration as that one. And we really don't have too much maximum capacity anymore now that it's connected to the rail trail, as you mentioned.
So you heard the discussion here about parks, and do you have a rule of thumb of when you, for the parks in the town, of how many parking places you normally think are adequate?
I think park is too broad of a term, but I think there's an opportunity to define active park and passive park. At this point, I would define Carpenter as a passive park where, it's passive amenities, but certainly Mulberry Fields and other activated parks where there's planned activities or infrastructure, those would dictate a larger parking lot for sure. So I think it really comes down to anticipated use.
How many acres is Starkey Park?
80.
And how many parking spaces are dedicated for that?
I think it's around 25. I'd have to go count again.
So that kind of scales along with Starkey Park.
well, they're adding 20 some odd new parking spots around the facility. So I mean, like I said, it's 88, it's 80, I can't remember the exact number, but I know it's around 80 some odd parking spots of this total for this entire 215 acres is 20 some odd new parking spots. Like I said, I'm just concerned that it's a little bit low on parking spots. And I respect wanting to keep it as pristine as possible. But I definitely don't want to see people driving and pulling off on the side of the road because there's excitement about a new park in that part of the community. So
I completely agree with that.
I was out there recently for one of the openings, and there is a fairly large gravel parking area in which we parked. Is that a permanent or was that a temporary?
That is the existing 88 spaces, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Yep. If that was closer to the clubhouse?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Just off the road, essentially.
Yes. Yep.
so that lot currently is not paved, it's a
It's
gravel
paved.
lot?
There's just some repair that needs to be done.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm playing devil's advocate here. I guess until this is a really new entity for the town, and it's kind of hard to predict how it's going to be used. As I think as he's indicated, there'll probably be, at the beginning, a lot of people who are curious who will come to see what's there. Over time, I would guess the standard usage will even out. And I'd like to see putting in parking for hundreds of cars and then have that just be, even if it's not hardscape as such, if it's kind of environmentally eliminating the native plant.
I mean, there's plenty of acreage out there to add parking down the road, but Jared, if you're back in here and, in a year, can I say I told you so, or at least?
If I'm back in here in a year, that'll be impressive to add a nature center in 1 year, so.
I think if you're back here in a year, we'll say congratulations.
I
Actually,
think that might be in order, yes.
I think I've been in almost every park, and I would say even one of the newer ones, Elm Street Green, you count the spaces up the top and down the bottom. I've never seen any shortage of parking places. You can always find a place to park. Starkey might be the most difficult to find a place at times, but, I'd rather gamble on having too few and have to enlarge than overshoot the mark and put more pavement down when that's counter to the intent of that center.
I agree. Further questions? We ready to?
Offer a motion if you would like.
Yeah, I'm ready. You're ready. Oh, sorry, just a moment. I've been reminded, is there anyone here that would like to speak, either on behalf or against this petition? Or do we have anyone online? Nope, we're good?
All right, I move that docket number 2024-48-DSV, Development Standard Variance to reduce the required number of parking spaces for property at 601 South 900 East be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report and staff recommendations, the submitted findings of fact, and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans and evidence presented during the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you, Mr. Hurst. Any further discussion? Mr. Smith, will he take over?
Postlewaite?
Aye.
Ford?
Aye.
Ms. Mundy?
Aye.
Mr. Hurst?
Aye.
Motion is carried. Your
Sincerely appreciate
variance
it.
has been
Thank you.
granted. Thank you. Thanks for the good work.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is docket number 2024-49-DSV. And this is a development standards variance also. Matt Fortney, is Matt Fortney here? Good. We'll start with the staff report. Mr. Smith?
Yes, ma'am. Let me pull up the site plan to go over real quick. So we've added, after discussion with staff today, we added one additional thing that I want y'all guys to review if you get to the point where you're going to approve it. I'll talk to that at the end of this discussion. To summarize our conversation, staff supports these requests. Pulling up the site plan here. In your staff report, you have two items identified. Item number one, you'll see here, 30-foot building setback. The first problem we had as staff, well, there was two problems. Number one, we don't necessarily have a standard or a definition in our zoning ordinance for what is classified here as a building setback. It's a frequent term that you see in the planning field, but for whatever reason, we just don't have that in our zoning ordinance. What we do have is a standard titled minimum front yard, right? And that minimum front yard is 20 feet. However, on this plat, it was recorded with a 30-foot building setback line, and as you can tell, they're encroaching into it. So request number one that you're going to see in your staff report is permission to cross over those build lines, right, to encroach over those build lines. And you'll see there's a 30-foot build line along the eastern property line over here. And on the southern property line, there is an 85-foot building setback line. So request number one is to approve this development to encroach over both of those lines. Request number two, back to the eastern property line, is getting back to the minimum front yard standard in our zoning ordinance of 20 feet. They need to reduce this down to 11 and a half feet. So rather than being able to provide a 20-foot minimum front yard, they're needing to reduce that down to 11 and a half feet. The third issue that isn't addressed in your staff report, but based off conversations that we had as a team today, we wanted to make sure we covered all of our possible question marks. So when this project gets to Plan Commission, there's no question marks out there. There was some discussion relative to drive aisles. Mike Dell has been out this week. So ultimately, when there's question marks in the zoning ordinance, we will go to Mike and let him make the determination. In his absence, we wanted to be more conservative, more safe than sorry. So we're going to ask for a reduction in this 85-foot build line. We're going to ask to reduce that down to 59 feet, which accounts for the area in purple that you see on your screen. And what that does is that will allow us to account for the drive aisle in the event it's determined that drive aisles do need a variance. We want to make sure we cover our bases. So to get to staff's position, the real intent, or one of the intents, of the minimum front yard standard is to have uniform development from the road, visual uniform development from the road. And the properties to the north and to the west of this site have already been developed. Granting these variances will allow this parking lot and the development to align with the existing developments to the north and to the west, which gets to the intent of the setback standards. So in order to do that, we need to grant these approvals. That's why staff is supporting this request. If you have questions, I will happily take them. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to you. I guess I'll point out again, I didn't put a third sample motion, so if you get to the third motion and you need assistance, just let me know. We had sent these staff reports out last week, which was prior to today, obviously, so your packet doesn't include the sample, the third sample motion.
And is a petitioner here, or his representative? You give your name and address, please, for the record.
Yes, thank you and good evening. My name is Matt Price. I'm the attorney for the petitioner. Just to clarify too, Matt is the CEO of Goodwill, and Goodwill is the petitioner and anticipated user of this property. If I could call up the brief presentation I have, I'll help provide some additional background. I think Jonathan did an excellent job of capturing kind of the essence and intent of the variance request. But if we could go to just the first slide. First of all, the petitioner is Goodwill. It's a nonprofit company with facilities all across central Indiana. And we have representatives here, Jared Rains, who could explain more about Goodwill's operations, but I'll take you through the details of the variance first. You go through the next item.
I think we can agree that we all know what Goodwill is and what they do. I don't know whether.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wanted to make that option available,
Right.
including some
Thank you.
operational items if you
That'd
needed
be
that.
great. Thank you, Matt.
This is the parcel in question. It's the last remaining lot inside the Northwest Technology Park. As Jonathan was mentioning, This property was developed really pre-consolidation in Zionsville. It was initially annexed back in 1999. There had already been a plat approved at that time, which established the building setback lines. And actually, when the town approached Browning Investments to be annexed into Zionsville, they agreed to do that with the proviso that the development standards applicable to the property would continue to be the Boone County development standards, and in particular, the setback standards that are identified on the plat. If you go to the next slide. This is a depiction of where the location of the building setback lines are relative to the property. And as Jonathan was mentioning, the building setback line along Zionsville Road is 30 feet, and that's 30 feet from the right-of-way. And then along 96th Street, which is at the bottom of that slide, it's 85 feet from the center line of 96th Street. And Jonathan is correct that under the Zionsville zoning ordinance, we do not have a definition for building setback, but under the former Boone County zoning ordinance, it's as you might anticipate, the building setback refers to the line where the building itself is located relative to the property line. Zionsville has a more general definition pertaining to setbacks generally, which includes buildings and other structures. And in previous discussions with Jonathan, we understand that the town is taking the position that other structures includes parking areas, whereas under the Boone County regulations, you're permitted to put parking inside the front yard. You can't put your building inside the front yard, but you can put parking inside the front yard. So if you go to the next slide, this shows, it's I think the same slide from the staff report. This shows the actual degree of quote encroachment, if you will. What it is simply allowing the front yard to be used for parking, as is done with the property to our west and the property to the north. And in both of those instances, those properties comply with the Boone County ordinance in the sense that they provide for the buffering between the parking lot and the adjoining right-of-way, and this proposal would likewise continue to comply with the buffering between the right-of-way and the parking strip. So if you go to the next slide, this shows our actual planned site configuration, and it shows the parking along our eastern property line. And again, we comply with the building setback as that was historically applied in Boone County, but it does permit us, this variance would permit us to locate the parking area across the building setback line, provided that we continue to comply with the buffering requirement between Zionsville Road and the parking lot. And then likewise on the southern end, it's a even more expansive building setback line. The variance would permit us to locate the drive aisle as well as just the very southern end of those parking spaces, which extend into the setback line. We agree with staff's statement of what the intent of the setbacks are, which is to provide uniformity among adjoining properties. Both of the properties to our north and to our west are, as I mentioned, legacy developments, and this would just allow us to develop the parcel consistently with those surrounding properties while maintaining the buffering requirements that are in place for the property, both historically and under Zionsville's zoning ordinance today. I should mention that along with Mr. Raines, I also have Brian Sheward, who's our civil engineer here this evening, and Suzanne Baker, who assisted with the petition from Denton's, available to answer any questions that you have. So appreciate the opportunity to present tonight. Thank you.
One question, the drop-off section to drop off donations, is that on the western side of the building? Is that what I'm seeing?
Yep.
There's a single entrance and exit, and that is on
Yes, that's
96th
right.
Street.
That's correct.
So both the consumer or the shopper would use the same as those dropping off items.
Correct. Yeah, and no access point off of Zionsville Road.
That last slide back up again, please, with the schematic. The last slide. So one other question with regard to that donation drop-off area, that would be accessed not by driving around the building, but pulling in and then doing that, using that parking lot to make a U and then drive? Or how is that to be used there?
Yeah, go ahead.
You would give your name and address for the record, please? Thank you.
Jared Rains, Senior Director of Risk Management, Real Estate, and Facilities for Goodwill of Central and Southern Indiana, 1635 West Michigan Street. And to answer your question, we have tried many times to tell people how to drive, and it typically does not work out in our favor. So we try to design and put together a site layout that allows a couple different options. So ideally, they would enter off of 96th Street. We also have a number of different customers. We have donors and we have customers and we have folks that do both. So ideally, we will design it so that they can drive directly into the drop off their donations. If they'd like to do a U-turn and just exit because they're not shopping, we want to give them that option. The other option would be potentially drive around the building back to the front where they can park and go inside and shop. So in a perfect world, all things approved, we would like to have plenty of space to give our customers and our donors both options.
Thank you.
Yep.
Is that two loading docks on the north end of that building? Yes. And are those used during business hours, or is that where they come in early in the morning and after hours?
The reason that you see two loading docks is because we typically will drop a trailer, and that trailer is left there. So having two loading docks gives us the ability to drop one, immediately pick the other one up, and get out of the way. Most of the time, this is done during business hours. In some of our tightest locations where it's not safe to do so, we do only kind of employ after-hour drop-off and pickup. We wouldn't expect that that would be necessary, but if anything, if traffic concerns became a problem, if the store became so busy that we wouldn't feel comfortable with getting a semi in there during business hours, we would have that option. We run our own transportation all over central and southern Indiana, so we have the ability to run 3 shifts. If a third shift would be needed for a location like this, we would do so, but not initially planned.
What is the frequency of those drop, or that truck getting loaded and pulled out of there? I know it varies from stores and times
Yep.
of the year, but a rough,
We
once a
believe
week?
this will be a great location for donations, so it would probably be ideally, hopefully on the higher end of the donation scale. That could mean anywhere between probably 4 and 7 times a week. So realistically, we're probably looking at 4 to 5 times a week if it meets our expectations.
Not in and out of there 4 or 5 times a day, though.
No, that would be amazing if that would actually happen, but no, ideally even our busiest sites typically will only have 1 pickup. Occasionally, the really busy season when a store gets kind of flooded, they may have to call for an emergency pickup, but it's really, really rare for us to have more than 1 truck in and out per day.
Thank you.
I see this is roughly 15,000 square feet. How does that compare with your typical facility?
It's really, really, really close to average. So we have a calculation that we use based on our pro forma that we put together for our board approval on both sales and donations, and we kind of extrapolate that into a perfect size box. Of course, we like to kind of go as big as we possibly can. So if we run the numbers on what we would consider kind of an average or a slightly better than average store, we'd be looking at about a 14 or 15,000 square foot box. That puts us right kind of with the site plan that you have in front of us. And in a store like this that should be a little donation heavy, we'll go a little larger on the back room and the processing area and a little smaller on the sales floor, but that's where we make that adjustment within the square footage of the box, depending on what we expect in sales versus donations.
Thank you. Are there additional questions? online that don't want to comment?
Yes, ma'am. So that's what I'm pulling up here on my staff report, just to make sure I get them in the correct order for you. So motion number 1. Is to encroach into the platted building lines along 96 and Zionsville Road. So if you pull up the site plan, if you can switch it to my screen. So the first motion essentially allows them to build in the purple area that's on your, or the blue area. Second motion covers us in the event that we need to know the exact minimum side yard. It's going to be 11.5 feet from right-of-way. So the second motion takes care of the eastern property line as you see it. The third motion is going to be the exact same motion as motion number 2, but instead of being 11.5 feet, it's going to be 59 feet along West 96th Street. Instead of 11.5 feet along Zionsville Road, it's going to be 59 feet along West 96th Street. And what that does is it accounts for the encroachment of the purple. So it'll move that line all the way down to the bottom. And what I'll point out too, another reason why staff supports this request is if the plat had been recorded to our minimum standards, specifically the front yard standard. I can't zoom in enough for you to get a big number on the screen, on the computer screen up there, but that number is 24.5 feet from right-of-way. Our minimum standard's 20 feet. So even by granting this variance, they still exceed the minimum standard by 4.5 feet. So again, that's just another reason why we support it. We just want to make sure we have the paperwork in place to where when these guys get to Plan Commission, if there are any questions, we've got an approved variance, there's no hiccups, and we don't have to come back. So the third motion is the same as the second. It's just instead of 11.5 feet from Zionsville Road, it should say 59 feet from West 96th Street. And I've got 3 forms for you to sign as well, if you'd like to approve them. Oh, go ahead.
I think we want to clarify one thing. For the 96th Street, I think it should be 59.5 feet from the center line, 96th Street. Isn't that right?
Would give your name and address for the, thank you very much.
My name is Brian Sheward with Kimley Horn & Associates. Our offices are at 500 East 96th Street, Suite 300, Indianapolis. One item to note as well, so I laid this out, and it is very important, as Mr. Raines had said, to hit that 15,000 square feet for the size of the site. My first thought was, can I pick this whole thing up and shift it west? Because if we could shift it west, I think that it does create a bit of an odd look, honestly, from the street. When you have a development to the north with parking here, we're set back real far. We tried to work within this. If we have to, the issue to me is if we pick this up and we shift it west by 18 feet, let's say, to conform with the 30-foot building setback line, in essence saying we can't put parking there, it creates a really cramped area on the west side for those semis to come in. That's the issue. So a semi is going to come in, turn around, back into that dock position. If we cramp that area on the west, it creates a hardship for that. So I think the request to encroach specifically on Zionsville Road frontage is twofold. I think it works better with the just visual appearance of the site to be consistent but it's also from a practical truck turning movement on the west side. So I want to make sure that was understood. It does create a hard time if we can't do that. And I think it could reduce the building square footage, which could put the project in jeopardy. So I just wanted to note that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just to clarify on my third motion, make it 59.5. It doesn't change staff's positioning either way, because if you look on the site plan, you're still 24.5 feet from right-of-way. The standard's 20 feet. So either way, they're fine from a minimum standard standpoint. We just need the paperwork to reflect. So when they get to Plan Commission, there's no problems.
I could tackle the first motion if we're ready. I move that docket number 2024-49-DSV Development Standards Variance to encroach into the platted building setback lines along West 96th Street and Zionsville Road for a property at 5900 West 96th Street be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report and staff recommendations, submitted finding of fact, substantial compliance with the submitted site plans, and evidence presented during the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Hurst. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fedora. Is there further discussion on this motion? Roll call vote, Mr. Smith?
Wait.
Aye.
Mr. Fedor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Hurst?
Aye.
The first variance is approved. We have a fearless person to take on number 2.
Hell, why not? All right. I move that docket 2024-49-DSV Development Standard Variant to reduce the minimum front yard along Zionsville Road to 11.5 feet from the property line at 5900 West 96th Street be approved as presented and described based on the findings of the staff report, staff recommendations, submitted findings of facts, substantial compliance with the submitted site plans, evidence presented during the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Fedora. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Further discussion?
Ms. Postaway? Mr. Fedor?
Aye.
Mr. Mundy?
Aye.
Mr. Hurst?
Aye.
Okay, that variance is approved. Somebody want to do the freelance?
Yeah, I move that docket 2024-49-DSV Development Standards Variance to reduce the minimum front yard along West 96th Street to 59.5 feet for the property at 5900 West 96th Street be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report, staff recommendations, substantial findings of facts, or submitted findings of facts, but substantial compliance with the submitted site plans, evidence presented during the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Fedora. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Hurst. Do we need to amend that to 59.5 feet from the center line?
Let's do that. 59.5 feet from center line to reflect what's on the recorded plat.
All amenable with that amendment? Okay.
Ms. Postaway?
Aye.
Mr. Fedor?
Aye.
Mr. Mundy?
Aye.
And Mr. Hurst?
Aye.
Good. Thank you. Mhm. Other matter to be considered on our agenda. And Mr. Smith, if you would advise, do you want us to act on this tonight, even though we are not all?
Yes, so this is, with this being the last meeting of 2024, and with there being some possible changes, there's no guarantee that this group, even though there's 4, There's no guarantee that this group in its current configuration will be present starting in 2025. My belief is y'all are the ones that put the time and the effort into reading it and reviewing it. So I would appreciate or like for y'all to have the opportunity to be able to vote and approve these. They should be finalized. You pointed out a change on the document. I've made that correction. So no other corrections were identified. So the draft that you see is the final version. The draft that I have here is ready for you to sign. If y'all have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Is there any discussion about the?
But essentially, if they're voted on and approved tonight, they will go into effect starting the first meeting of January 2025, which is a good time to have new rules kick into gear anyway.
Calling the roll to have votes is another thing that will be changing. Oh, sorry. I was giving too much credit to this microphone, so sorry. So we'll be calling roll for our votes in order to help the transcriber. We will probably be starting with a sign-up sheet for people who would like to make public comment. I think in a case like this evening, we didn't have a lot of folks wanting. Want to address one of the petitions, either for. I don't know if you have thoughts, if you've had a chance to look at this. Are you ready to?
I think it's been well considered. I understand the changes from the current rules and procedures in effect, and I'd be prepared to move it forward tonight if the BZA as a whole is.
I appreciate staff's time they put into doing this. I know it's not an easy task, so a lot of hours been put into it, and I appreciate it.
I'm in agreement.
Yes. So do I have a motion to approve the
I
new?
move that we approve the new Board of Zoning Appeals rules and procedures effective January 1st, 2025.
Thank you. Second?
Second?
Thank you, Mr. Hurst. Any further discussion? Mr. Smith, if you would take a roll call vote, please.
Ms. Postlewaite?
Aye.
Mr. Fedor?
Aye.
Mr. Mundy?
Aye.
Mr. Hurst?
Aye.
4-0.
Will be. Having said that, and after Mr. Smith's comment, we don't know how we will be configured when January rolls around, but I personally would like to. I'm going to embarrass you here, how much I've appreciated your long.
Oh, well, thank you.
In many roles, and it's been much appreciated in your.
I've enjoyed most of it. There are no almost volunteer jobs that go uncriticized at times, but it's been my pleasure. That was part of my goal when retirement was to give back, so.
Yes, well, you've done more than most, so thank you.
Thank you.
So if there's no further business, I guess we stand adjourned until 2025.
See you all next year.
Yeah?
January 7th. So it's not the first Wednesday of the month like we usually do. It's the second, I guess the first Tuesday of the month, January 7th. So.
Hey, then.
Yep.